Welcome, everyone. Move and Bloom here, live with Lee Muser of Integrative Healing. And today's topic for our talk and wonder is it's never too late to start.
Never too late to start.
We both have had clients in their 90s, and we're just going to start with some stories. You want to tell your story, Lee?
Yeah, first I just want to name that, like, in the position that we're in, we get to experience like so many pretty like life-changing experiences with clients. We get to watch change over time.
Yeah.
And like we always have a different perspective because like we're not in their body. We're like standing in from a different perspective. And so we get to see what I might call evolution or change, maybe even differently or more profoundly than the person themselves, which is always really interesting.
Absolutely.
So it's exciting. I say that because it's exciting to get to tell the stories because we witness them and we experience them, but we don't often get to talk about the stories that we're seeing. And so like when there's this like opportunity to tell a story, I'm like, oh, here's this great story, right? So my story involves a 98-year-old man. And it was quite a while ago, but I got most of the details, I think, still in me. His daughter had actually reached out to me, and I had a relationship with her, but I was not like her therapist anymore. But she was like, would you consider, like, my dad's looking for somebody to work with. He wants to have some resolution before he dies. And
Yeah.
and maybe she wasn't that succinct. I'm not sure. So we made contact, and I didn't really know how old he was, but learned he was like 98. And he really wanted to talk about like all the, let me find a word that matches the word I really want to use, like the messed upness that he
Mhm.
had engaged with his kids, mainly this particular offspring. And indeed there were some really really horrible things that they were really just trying to make peace with before they died. And they did. They got to have their story heard, and
Mhm.
got to get another perspective or connect with another perspective or another coexisting reality that was outside of their very limited perspective or their one perspective, right?
Right.
And that brought peace for them. And it brought peace for the person who, the daughter. And
Mhm.
um I remember one day the client not showing up to an appointment, and I was like, okay, like, and then I didn't hear from them. Like, oh, maybe they're late, maybe they next day didn't hear, and reached out to the daughter, and she's like, he did actually die. Like, he died
Yeah.
a few days ago. And I had a relationship with her for a while. Every once in a while, I will still get an email from her, but just the profundity for both of them, like he got to, just like a weight was lifted off of him. And
Yeah.
he got to meet a part of his relationship with his daughter that maybe they'd never even had, and then she got to meet a dad that she had never had. And so I'm like, this is, if this is does not speak more loudly to it's never too late, like I don't know what could possibly speak this,
Right.
that like that message into into
Yeah.
into knowing. Yeah. And I'm sure you have like some stories too.
Oh, yeah, but that's just such a beautiful story to me that at 98, someone would actually be looking
Hmm.
um for change. I mean, maybe those weren't the words they
Hmm.
used, but
Yeah.
looking for possibilities that things could be
Hmm.
other than they had been.
Yeah. And looking for peace, really, like they were tormented by a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
that's really interesting. And I am always like trying to draw the parallels to the physical since
yeah,
you
yeah,
do a lot of somatic things and you also talk a lot. And in my office, we tend to talk very little aside from beginning and end chit chat and mainly
yeah.
deal with the moving body. to talk to the brain. But I
Mm,
latched onto that word peace because it does bring people peace
mhm,
to find out where they are, to
mhm.
feel where they really are, so they can move into something new. And my 91-year-old says it, came for his reason. But I love what he said. He says, I'm interested in life again,
Oh my gosh.
you know?
Right?
And I think
Oh,
that's really at the core of change. It helps
yeah.
us feel alive, no matter
Yeah.
what our age.
Yep. Yeah. One of my phrases that I use that means so much to me is to be a participant in an empowered participant in our own life. Right.
Ooh, I
And
love
that's what
that.
I hear like from your client. That's what I hear him saying. It's like, I want to be an
Yeah,
empowered participant in my own life. I don't want to just like waste the
yeah,
years away, you know. I
yeah.
want to be alive in my life.
You want to be alive in your life. I love that. I love that.
Mm.
And we arrived at this topic kind of in a roundabout way, but you had said something in one of our prior conversations, perhaps off air, about how a lot of the work you do is about unwinding old patterns.
Mm, hmm.
You want to say something about that? I can't hear you anymore, Lee. I'm sorry.
Let's see if that's better.
That's better.
Yay. Okay. Um, Love technology. I made a note earlier of like brain and body because you'd mentioned brain and body and like arrow communication. Um, what can you say the question again that you asked me? Do you remember?
So we had been talking, and you mentioned that a lot of people want to jump straight to just give me the good stuff, and
Oh,
it's
unwinding.
and first it's unwinding the old patterning.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that's what reminded me of that is the brain and the body and like the brain and yeah, our whole system are in communication, right? And the
Mhm,
brain and the system have constructed a reality on some level based on a lot of different experiences,
mhm,
mainly experiences, or
mhm,
um, it can also be like what we've been told by doctrine or by culture or like mores or norms or whatnot. And so we form a certain reality, and that reality often is very oppressive, actually, because
mhm,
we live in a pretty restrictive, rigid, oppressive culture that's very much telling us should, supposed to, have to. You have to be this way to X. You should, you have to, and it doesn't allow for personal discovery, right?
mhm,
So when we want to be an empowered participant in our own life, or we want to have an aliveness, we have to unwind the programming that we first have, right? And that is a process. That's actually a whole paradigm. Like if we can embrace exploring what is contributing to our movements, we will now be outside of the dominant narrative of
mhm,
should, supposed to, have to. We'll be already embarking on a path of curiosity, of
mhm,
potentiality, of possibility, of imagination.
mhm,
That is like, if we can embrace those components, we're already doing the work that's going to take us into unwinding. Like we're already in the unwinding, like juice,
yeah,
which is pretty exciting. But it is a different paradigm. It's like a really different paradigm. And it can, well, I mean, you know how that is. It's hard. It personally speaking, with somebody with a lot of programming, it's not easy to
right,
unwind that programming. It takes lots of that curiosity, lots of that willingness to see potentiality, to explore, to be like a little scientist in my own system, to see what happens when I do that. Like, I know what happens when I do that, but what happens when I do this? Oh, I don't know yet. Like, ooh, that's like edgy, but can I, with the support of my people, can I lean into that unknown territory,
right,
right? So for
right.
you, like put it in your context, like, because I know it's similar, but in different
Yeah.
language maybe you would use.
Well, it's pretty similar. And I love that you said, personal discovery, because that is absolutely what it's all about, because then it's the context is your own life, your own body.
Yeah, yeah,
And that really changes how we can move through life. What do I want to say about that? There's something about, in my experience with the body, because people lie down, it happens fastest when people lie down on the table and I move them, because
mm,
then they're not engaging their patterning. Although
yeah,
I
yeah,
do have to say, sometimes the patterning is so strong that any indication to move from me, anytime I go to move something, they start to guess. They start to
yeah,
want to
yes,
go into old patterns.
yeah, to what's
And
familiar, maybe.
right. And
Yeah,
that's a really strong instinct that takes a while to go away. And it's
yeah,
just like, that's fine. It'll
yeah,
take a while. Let it be what it
yeah,
is. In the meantime, just do as little as you can.
yeah.
And then, but if they're enthusiastic about the process, thinking, I wonder what's going to happen,
Mm,
they get up off the table and there is change. And it's so fast. The change
yeah,
is so fast. The trick is, since we're talking about unwinding old patterning, is maintaining the change. And what
yeah.
gets in the way of
Yeah.
maintaining the change is it's just so much more grooved in to do the old thing.
Hmm. Yep.
So in our work,
Mm,
it's slowing down.
absolutely. Yes.
You
Yeah.
slow down, you can be like, am I doing the new thing or the old thing?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we've had these conversations before that change is slow from a brain and body perspective.
Hmm.
And we live in an immediate gratification culture.
Yeah.
And um, patience is something that I am definitely working on. Um, it's like it's hard to stay in that unknowingness where we don't know where we're going yet, although we can
Hmm.
taste, sometimes we can get little tastes, but then to stay with it, to stay with it and keep doing the practices that are going to lead to those neural pathways changing, right?
Right.
It's just science, really. It's pure science.
Yes.
And like we can say what we want about that, but at the end of the day, it's just science. It takes so many days, like many, many, many days for neural pathways to rewire, to reroute.
And so you're right. It doesn't take, well, I agree with the science, and the science that I'm familiar with says that you can establish a new neural pathway really quickly.
Yes, that's true.
It's like,
Yeah,
and I see it
absolutely.
on my table, it can be instantaneous
Yeah,
almost.
yeah,
What takes time is maintaining it.
that's right.
It's not the establishing, it's the maintaining, because
Yeah.
the brain is quick to prune what it sees as unnecessary. And if there's a
Mm,
stronger route, it's just going to
mm,
go with, but there's a stronger
mhm.
route. We don't need this. There's a stronger route. We don't need
Exactly.
this.
Yeah, it's going to keep going to familiar. No, I'm glad that you made that discernment, and thank you, because
Yeah,
you're right.
sure.
Like, I see that too. I see like
Right.
like people will have a session and it's like, right.
Right.
And it's the maintaining, it's the bringing whatever has been learned into the mundane of the daily life that strengthens that shift, that
Yeah.
allows for the maintenance of that new neural pathway or that new way of being.
Yeah. 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 And I think there's something about holding space, because this might lead us to one of the questions you received, but with, if we're going together through this process with a group,
Mm,
or if we're doing it with a practitioner, uh, one way to help facilitate that change is having people with you who
mhm,
understand that it's going to come and go. It's going to
right.
come and go. And that really opens up the possibility that, oh, everyone's assuming it's possible, and that this
Right.
isn't backsliding. There's
Yeah, I love
nothing
that.
wrong. It's just how the process works.
Just how the process works. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
Marnie. So was the question that you got asked somewhat
Yeah.
related to this?
Yeah, I think it is. Let me bring it in. It's a, it's a question within a larger piece. So I'll read it and then we can
Yeah.
kind of parse it out.
Mhm.
The question is, how do you build the trust within yourself that your decisions for evolution or for change or for
Mhm.
something different are reliable?
Mhm.
How do you rest with the decisions when self-trust and general trust in things getting better or changing, it hasn't quite, it's not an embodied reality yet. You haven't had the experience for more than like that little wake up, those little wake ups, right? It's
Yeah.
not maintained, it's not known in the system. And they say like you just have to trust in it being possible in other ways that maybe people tell you about, but you don't deeply know yet, right?
Right.
And then I just want to say like it's so funny that you said what that you said because they said I'm so glad I got communities of support for this.
Right.
Right. So like
Right.
immediately knowing like this is stuff that we need to be in community talking about because most of culture is not talking about this slowed down sense of change and evolution. It's just
Mhm.
not. Um,
Mhm.
so I want to go back to that question. How do um, we trust what we're embarking on when it's not a known reality? It's not a reality that's really in most of our life. It might just, like I said, might, or you said too, like it might be in moments. We might have it on the
Mhm.
table or, in the chair, or maybe every time on the table or every time in the chair. But like, how do we trust it when it hasn't made its way into more of our embodied life?
Right.
And I kind of think in a way, like we just kind of answered it in a way, which is it's to remember in a way, like we've had the direct experience, like we've
Mhm.
had it, it's just not all the time.
Right.
And it doesn't remove the doubt and it doesn't remove the questioning and the uncertainty and it doesn't erase like challenge or for this particular person, like they're having a lot of heartache and a lot of heart
Mm.
pain. Right. And so, it's like, oh, have I made the right decision? Am I doing the right thing? Am I
Mhm.
evolving because they're changing patterning, right? And when we change
Right.
patterning, like that patterning, whether we hate it or love it, it's comfortable to some part of us. It's what we
Yes.
know,
It's
you
familiar.
know. Yeah. And so we're gonna unintentionally often gravitate towards patterning that may be to our detriment just because our system knows it, and to make that,
Yeah.
it's almost can feel like a leap of faith to say, well, I know what that patterning does, and I can look back at my year and remember like, whoa, that's like there was a lot of, you know, turmoil or whatnot. And I want to just see what else is possible
Mhm.
because like I want to live in a world of possibility. I want to live in a world where maybe something else can be my experience. And can I remember that I'm with trusted folks and we're
Yeah.
in process
Yeah.
and we have a lot of other tools and ways of relating that remind us that we're not alone.
Yeah.
We're connected, and we can use that internal knowing of connectedness to keep us going in the rough times of doubt and like insecurity and uncertainty.
Absolutely. Yeah. Lean on your people.
Lean on your people, yeah, and like
Lean
just
on your
have those
people.
conversations with your practitioner or whatever. Like this never seems like this is going to change, and like I'm sure if a person said that to you, you give them validation. Like, yeah, this is a process. It takes time. And like, I feel that. I feel the realness of
Right.
like how slow it's moving.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that there was a thought that is gone, but maybe it'll come
Oh,
by if come back if I start
yeah.
talking. That that's when I encourage people to look for any change, right? Because we're
Oh,
we're
that's
so
nice.
focused on the change we want that
Mm-hmm.
we often
Mm,
forget that we are changing,
mm-hmm.
right? Because it
Yes.
might be in peripheral ways, but
Mm-hmm.
evidence of
Mm,
change is
yeah.
evidence that you can change. If
Yeah.
you did it once,
Yep.
you can do it again. If you
Yep.
did it in one realm, you can do it in another.
Mm,
And
yes.
being in a group, having a teacher, a practitioner, a therapist is also, embodied evidence in front of you because you've been through all your processes. I've been through all my processes. I've experienced the confusion, the doubt,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
the tears, the gnashing
Yeah.
of the teeth.
Yeah. Yes.
And my experience is not going to be everyone's experience, but I know in my body what it can feel like. And
Hmm.
so I can see and thus feel the change.
Yeah.
I can embody the change that they're not yet feeling. And that happens so often on my table. Like
Yeah.
people will, I had someone come off the table today and say, and I said, okay, now feel the changes. And he said, well, I feel just so much more confident on the right foot. And I said, really? Okay, now feel where your weight is. And he went, oh my gosh, it's over my left foot. So the
Mm.
old patterning was telling him that his right foot, because he doesn't have the
Yeah.
capacity yet to sense the left.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then
Still
he
waking
went,
up.
oh, right. So
Yeah.
it's in small increments
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
And any change is evidence that you can change more.
Yeah. That's great. And I think sometimes we need people to gently gear our
Hmm.
attention, because we are going to hyper focus. We're going to hyper
Yeah,
focus on what we've hyper focused on. And that's just, again, that's just neuroplasticity. Yeah, so we
absolutely.
need folks to just gently, like, what are you noticing over here, or
Yeah.
in my world it's a lot of times, we have these very either or thinking process. Sometimes we avoid pain, sometimes we're hyper focused on pain,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and they often like just flip back and forth very quickly, so then we have an inner war going on, right?
Yeah.
And so in my world it's like, okay, yes, we do have some pain happening, but
Mm.
notice where there's not pain. Like, let's
Right.
include on purpose, with conscious attention and experiential connection, how much of my system is not in pain. And people are like, oh my gosh, like 5% of me is in pain, but I've got like 95% of myself that's not in pain. And I have not been including that. I've been
Right.
hyper focusing on just, the right foot. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I've got a left foot and it really feels different. Like, right. And so we need to just bring attention to that so that the neuroplasticity can find that route, find that
Yeah.
inclusion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does that, can you tie that into the trust portion of the question? Because I think that's an important part of the question. How do you trust
Yeah.
yourself that you're moving in the, well, that's an interesting part of the puzzle. I took it to
Yeah.
mean, how can you, they said something like, how can you trust your decisions?
Right. Yeah. How can you trust like the different thing that you're doing,
Yes.
And so it's going to be different for every person, of course. So I'm like, how do I answer that with, the masses here?
Right. Right.
But it is including, like, can we trust that we can bring attention to what
Hmm.
we normally don't include, and
Hmm.
just let that be in our attention, right? So if
Hmm.
we have, like, OCD can be particularly challenging, but really any kind of anxiety or like rumination or just thoughts that are going to go towards a certain thing, like, in a way, there's a part of us that is doing that for preservation. It's doing that as a coping strategy. It's
Right.
doing that as a survival strategy.
Yeah.
And understandably from something of the past, or something of, that had validity at some point, but
Exactly.
at this point is no longer actually keeping them safe, or is, necessarily helpful. But to like pry one's imaginary fingers off of that coping strategy is going to be like the scariest thing in the world, right? So we don't have to, luckily we don't have to pry any fingers off of anything. We
Mhm.
can just explore, right? We can explore, like,
Exactly.
okay, like back to your client, like, yeah, they're gonna maybe move habitually, even though you're moving their leg, like, or whatever, let's just say leg.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe like they move in the way that they think they should let move, or they have moved. And it's like that state of allowance that you offer in is
Right.
really important, right? You're not like, no,
Yeah.
bad. It's like, yeah, the
No.
leg wants to move that way. And like, right. So you bring an allowance. An allowance
Right.
is like a gold rem. It's like gold, right? Right.
Oh, yeah.
Um, You bring an allowance, you give validation to the what wants to happen, and you
Hmm.
acknowledge, like, yeah, this might feel a little edgy, to maybe move a different way, to trust that another way can be moved. Um, or in my world, like that attention can go somewhere else and not grip just this one. Like maybe we
Hmm.
can share attention. So
Hmm.
attention can still go to the habituated whatever, but can some
Yeah.
attention also go to what needs no managing, to what's just so simple and so easy? And like, can we notice that there might be some of both? Right. So
Yeah.
we don't have to give up anything. We don't have to refuse the habituation. We don't have to deny it or resist it. Your and my job is to hold space for the whole thing that's happening within that, which is, and
Right.
setting the space for allowance of whatever is showing up,
Yeah. Yeah.
as
And
well as the
it's
possibility for something different.
as well as the possibility for something different. And it's really interesting because this is a conversation. It's a dance, it's a conversation. And for
Yeah.
me anyway, it's so much easier to do one-on-one than in groups because the
Yeah.
same cue can be interpreted as many different ways as there are people
Yeah.
in a room. And
Yeah.
of course you can do whatever you want with the cue, but I have to see if it's because you didn't understand me
Mhm.
or because you didn't hear me or because you
Mhm.
want to do something else or you want to try the thing I'm
Mhm.
offering. But there's
Yeah.
so it's so much easier with just one person. And then once that we've established, like, oh yeah, maybe I'd like to try that. It because sometimes we do things just with voice,
Mm.
that allowance does come in, like, yes, that's one great way to do it.
Yeah.
Because hey,
Yeah.
it's been working somewhat so far,
Yeah.
right? So that's
Yeah.
one great way. And for me, that trust comes in by making it really low stakes, right?
Yes,
Like
yes.
whatever you're trying is not permanent. It can be for
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
It can be super, super small,
yeah.
right? Like the tiniest, just changing direction, like one
Mm.
degree. What does that feel like? We
Mhm,
don't have to change huge amounts. We can learn trust really, really gradually. And
mhm.
then because what we're learning to trust is the process,
Right, right.
not the actual change. What we're learning to trust is that
Yes.
process of human discovery.
Yeah, of new discovery. I like that. I like that. And I think that there's there's always trust happening,
Oh,
but we
interesting.
don't always connect to how that trust is happening. Like
Hmm.
right now, like my feet and like particularly my feet and like a certain part of my lower back, like they trust that they can just really be here.
Hmm.
And I could say, like, all of us are trusting gravity. I could just say that cavalierly. Like, we're all trusting gravity. None of us are walking around like, oh my God, I hope I don't like I don't hope I don't float up to the sky today. Like, nobody's
True.
saying that. Like, on some level, like, we're all trusting this field of gravity, but we don't bring our attention, our somatic awareness to the experience of that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Instead, we're kind of like walking heads, so to speak, like
Yes.
disconnected from our actual experience of the
Yeah.
nurturance of gravity. Like gravity is very nurturing. If you ever
Yeah.
read accounts of people going into space and you kind of hear that, like you hear the body is not meant to live without gravity. It gets nurtured and cared for by the field of gravity. And
I
so in
like
this
that.
moment, it's like, oh, like I can feel this. Like my arms get to be heavy and my legs get to be heavy. And like I can just be so like I can be more fluid because I know that I'm held by this chair in a very practical way. This isn't esoteric or fantasy or like new agey, whatever. This is like real
Yeah.
science and bones and being
Hmm.
together in
Hmm.
an experience. And the same with breath, right? Like
Right.
breath is always caring for us. It's always nurturing our system. Like when we go to sleep, it just does. It breathes us like all night. We never have to like stay awake and make sure it's happening. Like, and some part of us trusts that, but we don't feel it. We don't
Hmm.
experience that cared forness that in a way that we could. And I
Right.
think like when we do these mundane things of connecting to trust in this way, it no longer
Right.
becomes mundane. It becomes like really important to a nervous system and to a sense of self that has been in a lot of really bad situations, and like where people were untrustable, like,
Right.
so we can learn like, oh, there are components of life that are actually just trustable at their inherence, in their
Yeah.
inherence.
Yeah. So uh, let me bring up the topic of association then, because this ties in here. Because one of the ways I think about what you've been saying is that a lot of people give dissociation a bad rap. So let's talk instead
Mm,
about association. But associating to something just means lending it your attention, right? Where if and of necessity, if my attention is going to my breath, to my feeling of trust and gravity, I only have so much attention.
that's
So
right.
it can't go somewhere else. So I'm not dissociating from the other thing,
That's
but
right.
I'm choosing what I want to associate to in this
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
And that is
Which is,
so
yeah.
important with movement, whether it's of thoughts, of emotions, of the body. And I feel like when we can trust our ability to associate to what we'd like to associate to without having to
Mm,
create it out of thin air. You just said it, it's there. It's there for
yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Then that trust starts to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In my world, we call it attention, like what we're
Yeah,
associating with, like what we're attending to with our attention.
yeah,
What we've just accidentally excluded the field of gravity, our experience and our relationship with the field of gravity. We've accidentally excluded this very simple, in some ways,
simple.
relationship with breath, you know?
Yeah,
And like connecting to breath doesn't mean we have to feel all the bits. It can
right.
just be like feeling breath in my nostrils. Because, like,
Yeah,
let's face it, if a lot of us have grown up in harmful or challenging environments, like it's not going to feel safe to connect to our breath. Like we're not going to associate, like using your language, our attention or associate with the experience of breath happening. We're
right,
going to, we're going to, what's safe is like associating with our thoughts or the
right,
ceiling or anywhere but this being, right?
right.
So we can connect to what's here simply without even going into the viscera or going into the lungs or the belly. We can
Yeah.
just like, we can feel it in our nostrils.
Hmm.
I've had clients who watch me breathe. They're
Oh,
like,
beautiful.
oh, you're right. Like, because we have mirror
Yeah,
neurons. And so they're
yeah.
powerful. Like, they just watch me breathe. And then their own system is connecting to breath. It's just a little differently than maybe they had been told they have to connect to breath.
Well, let's get rid of those shoulds.
Absolutely. Like, there's so many ways to safely
Yeah,
connect with a body. And there's those conversations are really, really important, and they
yeah,
do not generally happen in 99% of our
yeah,
world. And so the body continues to be really kind of dangerous and
yeah.
scary.
And it's interesting because the conversation gets kind of recursive then, because for a lot of people, they're not aware of the script of the should must.
Yeah.
And so even though they can see, so I'm bringing this up because it's in the context of trust. And again, these 90-year-olds who have the trust to engage in the
Mm,
process,
yeah. Yeah.
they have to let go
Yeah.
of the background script, which may be way in the
Yeah.
background,
Yeah.
that they have to get it right. Like
Yeah.
so they'll let go of certain shoulds, but they think that behind letting go of the shoulds, there's a right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Oh, yes.
And that is like a really big stumbling block for a lot of us,
Yeah.
including myself.
Yeah.
I
Oh, me
catch myself
too.
doing it all the time.
Yeah, yeah, and this is just a feature of our brains. Like our brains, can think in right and wrong, and very easily. And our
Yeah,
culture really embraces a binary thought process. So it really
right.
thinks in this or that, and right and wrong, good or bad. Like that's really inherent in our cultural
Yeah.
programming. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes for me, maybe not for the person who asked the question, but sometimes for me, trust isn't about figuring out whether
Hmm.
something is trustworthy or not.
Yeah.
It's of letting go of thinking about it at all.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I
Right.
mean, honestly,
Yeah.
because outside of thought, then there's just, does it
Yeah.
feel like it's taking me in the direction I want or not?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big ask, you know, it's a big
It's a
ask
big
to
ask.
give up thinking about something. Like when we've been mentally
Right.
managing our whole world and
Yeah.
someone's like, you can trust that you don't have to mentally manage the whole world. I mean, we can laugh about it like, haha, but oof, you know, like
It's
I'm
true.
not sure, right? So we just discover it together. Like we
Yeah.
just see, like, you know, I can ask myself that right now because I definitely grew up trying to manage everything. That
I know.
still happens
Yeah.
at times. Like, but do I need to manage my like my left hand? Well, I guess not. It's doing something on its own. You know, in this moment, I don't really need to manage it. Now, my right hand, I kind of do actually need to manage it a little bit because I'm keeping something from falling off the table. Right. So it's not either or. It's
Right.
like sometimes we need to manage things and sometimes we
Absolutely.
don't,
Yeah.
right? And it's like discerning with some curious questions, like, oh, what am I assuming I have to manage that maybe I don't, you know, and like
Mhm.
that attention and that, I forget the word that you used instead of attention, but
It's okay.
yeah, like just redirecting what is in our
Right.
field of vision, yeah, yeah, what we're connecting with.
And that is beautiful because that is exactly what we talk about, getting out of our own way, because
Mm,
it's feeling, because you do have to manage some things sometimes,
yeah,
but it's feeling where where can I manage less and less and less so I
yeah.
really have that feeling of comfort and ease.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like just peeling away the layers because
Yeah.
we're all doing lots of things we don't need
We
to. I mean,
are.
we can
Yes.
if we want, but
Yeah.
do we need to? And it's just playing with that.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's playing. It's really playing with that. Like I
Yeah.
remember, and we've had this conversation before, you know, I remember coming to early classes and, you know, of course you hear what your person is inviting, but like playing is not a part of my, it is now, but it's taken a long time for me to make friends with playing. Like I
Yeah.
just had too traumatized of a future of a past. I mean, you know, um, and so like to really trust that I can play,
Yeah.
you know, it's a big deal now. Like yeah, now it's a kind of a cornerstone of my life, and it's like and
Mm.
it's saving my life, like literally. You know, it's so important for me to be in those environments where I can play and I'm with people who allow play and like we play together and like we're goofballs, you know, and we're just like, you know, like
Yeah.
allowing that really important part of
Mhm.
like our youngness to be there that for some of us like it never really got to be there. Like I got in trouble for being playful when I was a kid.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, me too. It's like, oh, darn it. Like, you know,
Yeah.
so yeah.
That's really interesting because I forget where, in conversation with an anthropologist who
Mm,
said, I used to say that play was essential to all mammals.
mm,
But since
mm.
I've learned that really it's just essential to all life.
Oh
And I'm like,
my gosh.
wow, that's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
alive, you need play.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm like, you know, I'm looking at my backyard and I'm watching the squirrels jump from limb to limb. And like, I don't know what those squirrels are up to, but damn, they look like they're having a good time.
Right?
I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
that's wonderful. I feel more alive, more enlivened by this conversation.
yeah.
And I can see why the 91-year-old says, I just feel more interested in life now.
Yeah. So much
Yeah.
more. Yeah. Yeah.
And did we change? I think I changed a little bit talking to you.
Well, I think we're always in creation. We're always in
Exactly.
co-creation. We never stop being in co-creation. And I forget that a lot. Like my attention gets focused on what seems really solid, you
Mm,
know, and what seems really true based on neural pathway habituation. But when
yeah.
I breathe and when I giggle with you, you know, or when I feel like the camaraderie and the mutuality that we have, I'm reminded in my being, like I'm reminded
Mm.
that this breath is happening with your breath in your own way, like right now. Like it's not
Yeah,
happening in the past, it's not happening in the future. Like this is being created right now. And like
beautiful.
all of the variables, including the squirrels, are a part of this co creation. You know, like they're part of what showed up in my system as I was speaking with you. So, of course, they impacted me in some way. I can't measure that or, but I
Yeah.
can feel again, aliveness begets aliveness. It's generative, right?
I love
Curiosity
that.
is generative.
There you
So,
go.
yeah. So I
So
have, like, I'm sure I've changed and I can't track how, but I know that it feels good to be in mutuality and to be exploring these topics. And
yeah. What a beautiful way to close off this conversation. I'm so grateful for you and for everyone that tuned in today. If you have more questions for us for another topic, for another live sometime, go ahead and
yeah.
drop them in the comments or message us. We're both here on Instagram. I hope you all have a wonderful day and we'll catch you next time. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye bye.